Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Upward Spiral podcast. I am thrilled that we have a friend of mine, Dr. Christine Bishara here. I'm going to read her bio and we're going to let her fill in all the gaps that I might miss. But Dr. Bishara is an integrative medicine physician in New York City who consults with patients worldwide. Her approach focuses on healing the body by optimizing its natural abilities. She has discovered that all health starts in the gut and that the gut is the key to weight management, immune health, and mental health. She is the author of the best-selling book, The Gut Revolution. Christine, thank you so much for joining us. And again, please, if I missed anything.
I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me.
Amazing, amazing. So, a little fun fact that I'm sure our listeners already know, but our wonderful, amazing co-host, Dr. Gina Marie, is also an integrative medicine physician. So this should be a wonderful discussion. So Christine, please just tell us, what led you to writing this amazing book that I had the pleasure of reading. And, of course, I'm going to be talking about how much I loved it, but I'd love to just hear what brought you to it.
It's interesting because I think all of us choose career paths to a certain degree based on previous personal histories. And so for me, my love for the gut and nutrition and everything holistic started at a young age as a teenager. I was obese, and not only was I overweight and just feeling like not the best physically, but mentally also just was not like a happy person. And so one summer I decided to lose weight, and I started doing it through intermittent fasting and not starving, just restricting time windows. And then I lost all this weight. And then I went to medical school and we started studying, remember the pathways, biochemistry pathways, and all those glycogenolysis and all of that. And then things kind of started coming together for me and understanding what the process was for me and why I was able to lose the weight. So for me, I've been passionate about it, and I did internal medicine the traditional way, but I've always just been really passionate about talking to my patients about nutrition. And as you both know, we don't get that much time to talk to our patients about all of that when we see them. And I really felt like I wasn't making as strong of an impact on people by just seeing them as their internist. And so this is why I kind of left traditional medicine and now I do integrative medicine. The gut stuff, I mean, I've always been a big fan of the book. The reason why, not a fan of the book, I mean, a big fan of the gut. But the reason I wrote the book was during COVID, my husband's an ICU doctor. He was seeing all these patients, and we started kind of putting two and two together about like who was getting really sick. And we kind of narrowed it down to a deficiency of gut bacteria that kids have a lot of. And so this is why they were protected. And so I was just talking to everybody about it, and people are just so curious about the gut. And I think it's because it affects everyone, right? Like what we eat. I mean, we all have, nutritional needs. And I think I just realized that this is a topic, and Michael, you know this, a topic that we weren't really trained in medical school on as much. And so that's why I wrote the book, just to really start a revolution.
Wow. I love that. That's amazing. So you doing intermittent fasting before when you were like in college? So you were
I literally started doing it at the age of 15, that the summer that I decided I was going to lose the weight.
so way ahead of the curve of intermittent fasting.
Well, back then it was called an eating disorder. I mean, I wasn't restricting, like obviously I was eating less calories, but I was eating like, first I started off, it was almost like a trial and error. First I started off with like, remember, well, you guys are young, but back in the 80s, everyone was like, oh, you have to eat 1,000 calories a day to lose weight. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, I'll eat 1,000 calories, but I was hungry and not really feeling like I was eating enough. So I started experimenting a little bit by eating a little more, like 14 to 1,600 calories, but then I would restrict the eating time. So I would literally not eat for 16 hours and just eat whatever I wanted, like healthy foods, but during that 8-hour period. And I started noticing I was losing faster and not as hungry. And so then I just kind of kept it as a way of life. But I got a lot of slack, like in medical school and even in my 20s, people were just like, why don't you eat late at night? Like they would just really wonder why I don't. And I'm like, I just don't want to. I'm not hungry. I don't really feel it.
Is
So
this something you've carried through? You still do it now?
I
Yeah.
still do it now. And it's become such a part of me that I feel really weird when I'm not fasting. And I don't do like 16 to 18 hours every day, but I do them at least like 5, 6 days a week.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
great. And I guess it becomes a habit. So it's like now, like you said, it's more natural to you now to do it rather than not to do it. So I would imagine it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of talk about this in the book about like what our bodies are equipped for. We have amazing bodies that are equipped for survival. And if you think about the way that our ancestors ate, they didn't have access to food all the time, right? They were either foraging, right? Whatever was in season. And foraging means finding berries, finding vegetables, finding whatever fruits are in season and eating that. And then hunting, which didn't happen as often as we think it did, and eating, little bits of animal protein. And this is what I talk about in the book as well, is that we're feeding these trillions of organisms in our gut. We're not just feeding ourselves, we're feeding these organisms, and they prefer plant-based foods. So we eat a little bit of what we like and a lot of what they like. And so when you realize that your body has these backup mechanisms when you're not eating, like when you're fasting, it turns to extra glucose stores like in the liver. So we store glycogen in the liver, and then we convert that glycogen to glucose when we're fasting. And so then we're kind of unloading the burden on our liver and decreasing our incidence of fatty liver, which a lot of people get now because they've never literally tapped into that glycogen storage. So that's one thing. And then after that, everybody knows this one, ketosis, right? So your body kicks into ketosis after it depletes the glycogen. So it's just understanding how our body works. And everyone thinks that we need to feed our cells all the time with external glucose, but that's not actually the case. We have external glucose almost as a storage for when we need that extra supply, but really our body has these backup mechanisms, and that's where fasting kicks in, and immune health kicks in too.
Would you say those are because you were alluding to the biochemical kind of behind the scenes of what helps, why you actually lose weight when you do intermittent fasting? Is that what you would like explain to your patients for our listeners?
Yeah. I mean, it's in the book and it's like a little bit lengthy, but the bottom line is your cells need fuel all the time, and they're either going to get the fuel from external food, right, which turns into glucose that gets supplied to the cells, or we have two backup mechanisms. So the first backup mechanism, if we're not eating, is the glycogen stores, where our body starts to tap into those. And we actually, believe it or not, have about 1,000 to 1,200 calories worth of glycogen stored. Yeah. So in the middle of the night, that's what we're tapping into if we haven't eaten, like a few hours before we sleep. And then after we've depleted all the glycogen and our body still needs fuel, it goes to fat cells, and it makes glucose from fat cells. And that process is called gluconeogenesis, the production of glucose from another source. And that produces ketosis, which everybody loves. But ketosis is honestly the best form of fuel for your cells, but also for your brain cells. So, and this is why people who are on keto diets, which I don't recommend, and I can talk about why, but this is why they feel so good and energetic, is because they're on ketosis for the majority of the day.
Have you seen the transition period? Like if you have a patient who's new to intermittent fasting, what have you seen that transition period look like? Because a lot of people, I think, will eat like regularly because they're like, if I don't eat, I feel shaky, I feel terrible, I'm going to throw up. And then going from creating like those longer times and what that looks like.
That's such a good question, because that's probably the most common complaint that I have with patients who start intermittent fasting is
Happened to me. I tried it. I'm telling you
really?
what
Okay,
exactly that Gina Marie just explained.
Yes.
When I first tried it, those shakes and everything. So that was like, well, yes, I want to hear the answer. Amazing. Let's do it, because that's exactly what happened to me.
Yeah, and it's probably the most common reason why people don't continue intermittent fasting. But here's the thing. Your body is so used to utilizing glucose as its main source of fuel. So when I say glucose, I mean external food sources, right? And it's actually easier for the body because it doesn't have to do the extra work of stimulating those backup mechanisms that I just talked about. So when you eat, It's an immediate fuel source to your cells. Your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin helps to transport that glucose into cells, and everybody's happy. But when you don't eat, what happens is your body's like, this is really weird. Like, what's going on? And so it almost like it panics and it goes into these glucose withdrawals. So that shaking and that morning like fog, and you're like, I'm so hungry, I just need to eat. It's because your body is so used to external glucose as its main source of fuel, and it doesn't know any better. So what I always tell patients is everything that becomes a habit takes usually 21 days, right? They say if you want something to become a habit, you have to give it 21 days. And it's the same with our body. If you want your body to work a little bit harder, and showing it that it needs to tap into those secondary and third fuel sources, you need to just tough it up a little bit. It's not, you're not gonna pass out. You're not gonna have hypoglycemia. It's really more about the glucose withdrawal that your body is reacting that way. And it takes about 3 weeks to get used to it. But once you get used to it, you're gonna see that it's really very efficient at making you even more alert and more vibrant. And I'll give you an example. So like what I recommend is to not eat 3 to 4 hours before you sleep. So if you're eating enough, and this is in no way a starvation diet, this is just eating. If you want to lose weight, you eat a little bit less, but if you don't, you just want to maintain your weight, but use intermittent fasting for immune benefits, you're eating normally during a certain period. Obviously, you want to eat healthier foods. And then, for example, if you're not eating 3 to 4 hours before you sleep, you probably start to feel hungry, right? And so I actually tell patients that hunger is actually a really good sign, because that tells you that your body is starting to kick into second gear, because the hunger is stimulated by a drop in insulin. So when insulin drops, right, that means your pancreas is not making insulin anymore, or at least releasing it. And then it's almost like a gear shift for your body to say, okay, I'll just give her like a little nudge. Hey, I'm hungry. What are you going to do so I can figure out what I'm going to do? And so we have one of two options. We either eat and our body's like, I don't have to do any extra work. Or we can say, no, I'm not eating. I'm going to sleep. I'm going to go to sleep. And then your body is like, oh, okay, I get it. I've got to do work. And so then it releases another hormone called glucagon, also from the pancreas. And so glucagon and insulin are opposites. So when insulin is really down, glucagon goes up. And when glucagon is released, it's what stimulates the liver to start burning that glycogen. And that's that process that starts. So ride the storm is what I would say. It's not going to last. I mean, there are days that I feel hungry sometimes, and I just, whatever, I eat something small if I have to. But the majority of the time, when you go to bed hungry, it's because that drop in insulin is now telling your body or indicating to it, like, what are you doing? Because you don't wake up hungry most of the time if you go to bed hungry, because it's tapped into those fuel sources.
So does that mean I'm blown away by all this, but I kind of want to start doing that again. But I'm gonna say after those 3 weeks, then is your body kicking into glycogenolysis sooner, or does it still take the same amount of time, but you're just kind of used to it?
You know, what they say is glycogenolysis kicks in between 8 to 10 hours after the last meal. Okay. So I think for people who have been doing it on a regular basis, it probably does kick in a little bit sooner. And even if it doesn't kick in sooner, it starts to become like this autopilot, right? And that's what I feel. I actually feel it with my body. I feel like my body knows, like sometimes if I get a little bit hungry at nighttime, it doesn't last long, because my body's like, oh, okay, I know what to do next. So I think that your body just starts to become accustomed to your way of life. It's building a habit for your body. It's teaching your body what it needs to do. Just like, with kids, you have a 1-year-old, right?
Yeah. Almost. Yeah. And an almost 3-year-old.
Yeah. So we have to teach our kids like what works best, right? Because they don't know any better, and our body doesn't know any better. It just wants an easy supply of glucose. It doesn't know that it needs to kick into these secondary habits, but it has them. It has them for a reason.
Yeah.
And the reason is we as humans are made to thrive on survival. So.
Yeah. And I love that positive connection with, you're going to feel hungry. But instead of thinking I'm hungry, oh my God, it's not working, my body's like, I'm gonna die. You say like, okay, let me put a positive association with it. It's working. Like it's
Yeah.
working. I'm in the process. My body is adapting. This means that it's working. Is there any like recommendations, like drinking more water or electrolytes or
Oh,
something to help
good.
with
I was
kind
gonna
of,
ask that. Great.
yeah.
Okay, so when we do intermittent fasting, the point of doing it is to allow that secondary and tertiary method of fuel, right? Fuel sourcing. But we actually get a little bit of a leeway. Like we can actually have 50 calories and our body can still stay in either ketosis or glycogenolysis. So what I say is like if you're super hungry at nighttime and you really like feel like you need to in the beginning, you can have like one of those like Starlight Mints or like those 5-10 calorie whatever candies, and you can just have that, and that kind of like stimulates your body like okay, things are okay. It's like appeasing it. In terms of the morning, a lot of people will tell me I can't fast because I need to have my coffee in the morning. And so there have been some studies that say coffee is obviously 0 calories. So it's not going to kick you out of ketosis in terms of like weight loss mechanisms. But some people say the coffee can be a little bit toxic in terms of the immune benefits that we're trying to induce with fasting. Personally, I need my coffee in the morning. I'm like, you know what? A cup of organic coffee is not going to like break me. And I actually do put a little bit of heavy cream, like half a tablespoon. And the reason why I put heavy cream is it keeps me full, but heavy cream has 0 carbs. So you're not going to kick out of ketosis, because the point of doing fasting is to get to those mechanisms. So a lot of people put milk, but milk has carbs. So, so if you put like a tablespoon or less, which is 50 calories or less in your morning coffee, you're allowed to have coffee in the morning. So, yeah, and water.
Choir here.
Mhm.
Preaching to the choir. Mike and I
Yeah.
are the coffee people in our residency. We do.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
all about
exactly.
it. We're coffee
Yeah, I think 90% of the population is drinking coffee, and you know, it is what it is. I mean, I'd rather still do fasting and drink a cup of coffee in the morning than say, oh, I'm not going to do fasting because I need to be in ketosis. You're still going to stay in ketosis if you're limiting the calories and the carbs.
I actually switched not too long ago to black coffee, and even with my espresso, when I grew up, as Gina Marie, I'm sure as well, like in a household where there was a little bowl of sugar next to the espresso every time, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I took those out to reduce the carbs of the carb intake, because carbs are huge for me. But
Yeah.
sometimes I do miss a little bit, but then I wind up in a way cheating and throwing in half and half or throwing in milk. So that's a great tip about the heavy cream, with that, the fact that it doesn't have carbs. I thought that was really interesting. And
Yeah.
I also love what you said before, because I was concerned when I had those shakes that it was like hypoglycemia. But it's nice to know that it's just your body telling you, like, you know what I mean? Like those tidbits about like, okay, yeah, that insulin's dropping, but just give yourself a second, we'll take over. That was so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I should say though, if you're diabetic, definitely talk to your doctor before you start fasting, because obviously they are prone to getting hypoglycemic. So they're individuals who I don't necessarily recommend fasting to, especially if they're on insulin. If you're pre-diabetic or you have insulin resistance, you could probably still do it. But I guess that's like a little disclaimer, so that yeah, I mean, obviously there are exceptions. People with eating disorders shouldn't be doing intermittent fasting too. Underweight obviously shouldn't also. But yeah, I think for the rest of us, those feelings that we get are just our body alerting us to what it's going to do next.
Yeah.
And we've misinterpreted hunger as a bad thing, when if you're eating appropriately and adequately, the hunger sensation that you feel is actually just, think of it as a gear shift. It's switching from insulin to glucagon, and that's it.
It's unbelievable.
So interesting. I know on days where if I'm eating more during a certain day and I don't get those hunger cues, I feel terrible. Like I just feel terrible. And then I'm like, okay, like I know I need to like take it back. And it's like you're almost like flooding your body constantly, and it has like no chance to kind of like change directions or do
Yeah.
it.
And don't you feel like naturally when you kind of overeat one day, I mean, we all do that. The next day you're just like, no, I need to like detox a little bit and just kind of let my body
Yep.
process everything. So
Definitely.
yeah. And this is another reason why we should stop eating 3 to 4 hours before we sleep, because our gut is working on digesting food after we eat, but it's also working on all these other immune benefits, right? I mean, we have these bacteria in our gut that are literally making neurotransmitters. See my cat. They're making neurotransmitters, vitamins. There's all this work going on in the gut. And if your gut has to focus on digesting all the time, that other stuff's going to get backed up. So it's like, when you have studying and things are getting backed up, like that's what you're doing to your gut if you're eating all the time. So that's another reason why fasting is really good for everything for your body.
And that's a great segue, by the way. You mentioned neurotransmitters because I wanted to touch on this. And we don't have to reveal everything because I want everyone to get your book. But it was all amazing. And I gotta say this, like, just like I said, you could see my review on Dr. Bishara's book. It was revolutionary, so title was appropriate. But the part about the psychobiotics and that the fact that our gut makes neurotransmitters, I don't remember that class in medical school. Okay. So unbelievable. And especially as G and I are really big on mental health advocacy. That was like a topic I was like, I have to touch on this today. So please, we don't have to give it away. This could be like a trailer, but
Oh, it's
you can
fine.
let me
I mean,
know.
yeah, I want to educate. I want people to learn, right? Because when people learn, they're curious to learn more. So I don't have a problem with that. So yeah, we're making serotonin in our gut. And yes, the majority of serotonin produced in our gut is actually for our gut. But what foods we eat that are the precursors of serotonin affect the serotonin production in our brain as well and everywhere else. So for example, tryptophan, think back to medical school. Do you remember tryptophan as one of the amino acids? I think we have like 27 or 29. I can't remember now. But tryptophan is one of the 9 essential amino acids. So what does that mean? Essential means it's essential for us to get it from an external source because we don't make tryptophan. And we need tryptophan to make serotonin. We need tryptophan to make melatonin. So people who aren't eating foods that are rich in tryptophan are not going to be making enough serotonin, and they're not going to be making enough melatonin. And that's going to show up in our mental health, right? And we're going to find that people who are melatonin deficient are not able to sleep well. So in the book, I list different neurotransmitters that we make and the food sources for each one, because again, we're making these things, neurotransmitters is one of them, but we need food sources to make them. And if we're not getting enough food sources to make specific ones like dopamine, GABA, acetylcholine, and serotonin, we're not going to make enough. And this is where it affects our mental health, but it also affects our cognitive function. It affects our memory. People who are GABA, for example, GABA is another neurotransmitter that actually helps with keeping us calm. And it helps with deep sleep waves during the night. So if we're GABA deficient, we're going to find ourselves anxious and we're going to find ourselves waking up in the middle of the night. So we have to make sure we're eating foods that are rich in the precursor of GABA, which is glutamic acid. So there's all these things that they're science, right? They're science that we should be studying and should be teaching our medical students, but for whatever reason, we're not. And I guess I could say maybe we didn't know enough about it. But now that we do, we should do better. And, Michael, you and I have talked about this. I would literally love to just start visiting every medical school I can try to visit and teaching students about this, because this is now data that we have and we need to be aware of it.
Absolutely.
There's a message to my students. If you want Dr. Bishara to come talk, by the way, please reach out. You have my email. Sorry. Go ahead, G.
No, I was just thinking, like, they say that it takes 20 years for research to come into clinical practice. I feel like it's similar, if not more than that, to actually see it in medical school. And articles are being published so rapidly now. It's like there's so much more evidence on it than they're even probably learning now.
Yeah. And I think now with the internet and access to information, that 20 years hopefully will be accelerated. Like in 2020, when COVID was, out, and I was talking about bifidobacterium, I literally, like, everyone had a blank stare on their face. And now people are talking about these bacteria in the gut, and they're talking about lactobacillus and probiotics and all these amazing things. So I think we're in 10 years, I really feel like gut health is hopefully going to be at the forefront of all of medicine, because I think it is the most important aspect of our health.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that to talk about that too, we always talk about probiotics, right? Everyone with probiotics, probiotics, probiotics. But what I loved too about your book was that it's not just about supplements, it's the beneficial things that we eat that will feed the bacteria that we need in our gut that are just as, if not more important than any supplement that we can take. Can you touch on that? Because that was another big eye-opening experience for me. Because I'll tell you, when I first got your book, I first jumped to probiotic because I was like, I need to know something real quick about this, right? But then I was like, oh, so I started backing up. I started backing up to like, oh, okay, hold on. And then, so please, if we could talk about that.
Yeah. So probiotics are basically live organisms, right? They're the beneficial live organisms that live in our gut. So I guess the best way to explain it is, and you guys probably already know this, if you think about your gut as like a corporation or an enterprise, right? And you're the CEO, which is how I explain it in the book. You have to feed your employees, who are the probiotics in your gut, the foods that they need to eat to produce the byproducts that we need. And if you feed them crap, they're going to produce a crappy job, and they're not really going to do well for the company. So what we need to do is, we have these organisms, but when we take only probiotic supplements, what are we doing to these organisms? We're just increasing the number in the gut, right? We're not feeding them what we need to feed them. And what they love to eat is plant-based foods. So, and each microbe has a different favorite food. So like bifidobacterium, for example, loves inulin-rich fiber. So where do you find inulin-rich fiber? In foods like asparagus or artichokes, or like the tuber type vegetables. Other beneficial bacteria prefer other foods. So what I say is, you have to feed the probiotics prebiotics, which are those plant-based foods, because in order for them to flourish and make byproducts called postbiotics, they have to be well fed. So yes, I don't mind probiotics as a supplement, but if you're only introducing other live organisms into your gut, what are you doing? You're just eating poorly, taking a probiotic, and you're not feeding those guys. You're just increasing numbers, right? And then after a while, some of the bad guys, if you're eating processed foods that are feeding bad guys, there's almost like a fight in there. And if the good guys aren't getting fed, they're going to tire out and they're going to die off. And then the bad guys are going to be in control, and you don't want those guys in control, right? So prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics, the best way to get a great ratio is food. We have to feed them what they like. We can eat a little bit of what we like, but we have to eat more of what they like, so they can produce these amazing things for us.
It's such an amazing analogy. That's so great. You have to feed your employees. You can't just add more employees, the other, while not taking care of your employees.
Love that.
Yeah.
All right, that's fantastic. Feed your employees. Nourish your staff.
You are the CEO
gut.
of an enterprise.
Yeah.
That's feed them properly.
I gotta say, I think I'm not. I think I actually I did. I'm pretty sure I told you this story, G. But I'd love to tell you about this, Christine. So this was my third year of medical school. So this was, I think, 2017, 2018. I remember. I was doing a rheumatology elective. Fourth year med school, rheumatology elective, right? And we're in the clinic, and we have a patient. She comes in, and the attending already knew about this, but she had the patient explain it to me because I was a student. This patient had rheumatoid arthritis and was on nothing that a rheumatologist or anything internal medicine that we would start a rheumatoid arthritis patient on. She had tried the medications. She didn't like how they made her feel. She stopped everything. She went to see who she called a homeopath or something of the other, who believed that the gut was the key to the immune system and was just focusing on her gut. And she was completely in remission with her RA for years by just focusing on her gut. And I was like, how in the heck is this? I was like, I didn't understand it. I was a medical student. I had learned all these things. No, but you have to start this medication. You have to start that medication. I don't understand this. Is it just that it was a fluke in remission and this is all baloney? And now I sit here today and I'm like, wow, how many
Mhm.
years ago she had it right? Because we're
I-
talking about that.
It's amazing. And this is a majority of the patients that I see. I see a lot of IBD patients who come in with inflammation, and we change their diet, and they're like, I can't believe that my GI doctor didn't tell me this. And I have to say, like, I'm not bashing any GI doctors or anybody, because we've really come a long way. But I think just me having that passion from a young age and just really being curious about this for many years, I've kind of just, like, figured out how to help people. But my goal really is to just have this so mainstream, right? And she's not a unique case. She's actually one of a lot of patients who I see on a regular basis who have put themselves in remission as a result of their diets.
Wow.
Wow. Have you had any experience with autoimmune thyroid conditions with the gut?
Hashimoto's is a big one.
Mhm.
So my opinion, Hashimoto's is, first of all, it's on the rise. Hypothyroidism is on the rise. And I think it's mainly due to the foods that we're eating, just the gut health, number one. But the other thing, and I do touch upon this in the book, is we are starting to become a population of iodine deficient humans too. And iodine is a trace mineral that's present in the sea and in things from the sea. And we don't go out anymore. Nobody goes to the beach anymore. I mean, like, sometimes they go like once or twice a summer, but hypothyroid, from what I remember in medical school, and I'm a lot older than you guys, reading about like goiters and hypothyroidism is like that was common in patients who didn't live near the water because they never got to see the water. But I'm seeing so many patients now with hypothyroidism, and I think a huge part of it is gut health, but also iodine deficiency. And I'm not recommending oral iodine because that shouldn't be taken, but we need to start supplementing. And we used to have iodized salt. So the USDA put iodine in all salt. I think it was like in the early 1900s. And then we started going away from that because we started telling patients salt is really bad for you and restrict. And then we actually started taking iodine out of salt now. So now people are using alternative methods like Himalayan salt, which is not a bad thing, but make sure your salt is iodized, because if you're not going to the beach on a regular basis, or you're not eating seafood or things that have naturally, high levels of iodine, you're going to be iodine deficient. And that hypothyroidism that's happening, and the breast cancer increase, I really feel like there might be a link to iodine deficiency in that, especially in women. We need more because it helps with estrogen receptor mechanisms too. So I definitely think that we as women need more iodine than men, and maybe this is why we see hypothyroid and breast cancer a little bit more in women than in males.
Wow. Are you finding that when you test for the iodine, I know it's a little bit, you have to do like urine iodine and those things, that you're actually picking up deficiencies? Because like working in an endocrinology practice, like we weren't, because we're assuming that like people who are iodine deficient are in developing countries, right? Like they're not here in the United States, which goes, right? It like flips everything upside down.
Well, and that's what it used to be. Like when I studied in medical school, it was people in these areas that are third world and not close to the beach and close to the water. And I mean, if you look at the incidence of hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, it's exponentially gone up. So I don't actually normally check for iodine in the urine unless I'm really suspicious that someone is very iodine deficient. What I'll do is I'll assume if you're not eating foods that are rich in iodine, or putting iodized salt in your food, I'm assuming that you're iodine deficient. And so what I'll do is I'll recommend iodized salt. But then if women, like a telltale sign that I'll get from women is if they have fibrocystic breasts and they're complaining of tenderness in the breast, that right there to me is a very big indicator that you're iodine deficient. And what I'll do is I'll tell them to get Lugol's iodine, the droppers, and to rub it on their breasts, like after their shower. And then I can't tell you how many people come back to me, how many women come back to me and they say, I did it for 2 weeks and I don't have breast tenderness anymore. It's like your body just really needed that iodine.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Any benefit to like adding like seaweed and things like that? Like
yeah, definitely. I mean, there are pills on the market that are molecular iodine. One of them, like Violet pill, They recommend it once a day. I'm not comfortable giving it once a day. So I'll tell patients sometimes, like my female patients, I'll say, you know what, if you want to take it once a week, that's fine. But we go into that whole realm of oral iodine, and it's we don't want to do that because we can precipitate hypothyroidism. So what I usually do is I'll recommend, like you said, seaweed, other iodine rich foods, and then iodized salt.
Wow.
Wow. But before we wrap up,
Wow.
wow is the only thing I could say to all this. Before we wrap up, just so everyone knows, this was a plethora of information, but I'm going to read a disclaimer in a second, because don't just stopping all your medications because of this wonderful advice. Instead, you should see a wonderful integrative medicine physician, such as the two that we have here, and consult with your primary care provider. So here's our disclaimer. The information provided here is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice. Please consult with your healthcare provider for any questions or concerns that you may have regarding your health. Do not disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have read or heard here. There's my disclaimer. All right. So, before we wrap up, Christine, this was unbelievable, by the way. Could you tell our viewers where they can find you, where they can find your book? Because if you haven't been convinced by now, you should be reading this book if you haven't already. So please, can you let them know?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. My publisher's working on getting it on Barnes and Noble, and then I'm going to be probably well, this is the thing that I just learned about books, is you have to it's like you have to market yourself. So we're working on getting it into physical bookstores too, but right now it's on Amazon. And I'm on mostly Instagram, LinkedIn also. But yeah, or they can go to my website and find me there, fromwithinmedical.com. So,
And I'll link all of this, by the way, including your wonderful book, The Gut Revolution, which, like I said in my review, is revolutionary if we didn't convince you enough here. G, any final words about this amazing conversation?
It's been so fun. So
Okay.
fun. Thank you so much. And thank you for writing
for
this
it too.
incredible. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here. Everyone, go get Dr. Bishara's book, The Gut Revolution. And just thank you for watching.